My name is Benoit Godin and I live in Whitehorse. I'm a biologist and I've been doing entomology as a hobby for about 20 years. I've always been interested in insects since I'm a young kid. So, and then of course one fall when Lumel opened, Luann was giving all sorts of courses on glass and all that kind of stuff. And one of the instructors says, well, what would you like to do as a little project like that? I said, well, what about a spermatica? And I was like, well, what's this? It's like, okay, I'll show you. Next time I'll bring my book and I'll show you what it looks like. And so we did a tiny little piece. And then I sent those as Christmas present, and I didn't tell them what they were. And then I got phone calls and emails and says, thank you for such and such species. And it's like, oh, okay, so they're good enough to be identified that way, because that's the way you identify these obscure rove beetles, is through their genitalia.
Hello, my name is Luann Baker-Johnson, and I am an owner and a glassblower at Lumel Studios in the Yukon. I knew that they would, even without seeing what he was going to create, I figured they'd be interesting objects, and sure enough they were. And so Benoit made these small little pieces of glass, and then he experimented at first, it went wrong, and then he made a number of them. And he sent them off to his friends. So that's the first time I met Benoit. And then a few years later, he comes back into the studio and he talks about making gigantic beetle genitalia. And we didn't know where it was going. Right from the beginning, though, I said to Benoit, but if we're going to do this, we need to make sure that people can see this, because the idea was fabulous. The idea of science and art meeting and growing something huge together, well, that was fantastic.
I've been interested in those because each time you open up the insects and you look at their structure, it's kind of a neon shape. To me, it's the beauty of all the little sculptures. They're so intricate, and that's why they're used for identifications, because they're all so different. Some spermatica may look, well, for instance, a Theta altaica is more like a tube with almost like a brain or spaghetti, that kind of stuff. It's kind of a ball. And then a Theta neartica is also with a tube, but the filaments are more in a certain directions. Although there are lots of variation, but there is a tendency to be more longitudinal.
Now, one thing that Benoit insisted on was that the glass beetle genitalia had to be absolutely true to their form. I'm a glass artist. I know how glass flows. I know how it wants to move. I know how I can encourage it to move in certain directions. But the genitalia that Benoit wanted us to make are very strange and not necessarily the way glass wants to move. And so it was going to be exceptionally challenging to make these pieces. Well, that's great. I love the challenge of it. But sometimes when Benoit is saying, oh, Lou, no, it's round there, but it needs to be indented here, and it needs to be pulled out here. I'm on the bench. The piece weighs about 30 pounds at the end of that pipe, and I have to try to figure out how to make this little divot in there and pull it out there. So exceptionally difficult to do.
But the process, of course, it was an iteration. The very first few ones were a little bit more of a take it back and forth, because I have an idea in my mind of what they look like, but at the same time, those pictures are two-dimensional. And Luann keep asking me, well, is it round, or is it pear-shaped, or is it flat, or is it like, well, of course it's round, but then she doesn't know those things. So at first, you know, because doing the glass work is, as I learned, quite the choreography between all the helpers and the person in charge. And then there's a time essence into this. So it's very quick. So you have to shape it, and you know, have to know what kind of shape it was.
But we struggled through it, and for the most part, I think we managed to capture the genitalia in their truest form that a human being could on the bench. And that's me on the bench talking, but I am surrounded by a workforce that is helping me get through this by lifting that heavy weight at times, by handing me the torch, protecting me from the heat. And then all along, Benoit is right there, either in front of me or beside me, saying, "Ah, Lou, this needs to be a little longer. Oh, this needs to be a little flatter." And so he's our coach as we make these pieces. And when Benoit talks about his beetles, I think the word is obscura, that one of their names, and that they're so similar. But once you have a variety of sizes of genitalia, your beetles become a variety of sizes. And it's really nice to celebrate their difference by making a papier-mâché entity, by making a wallboard entity, by making, just a drawing and a painting with oils and paints and pencils. But how do we display all these beetles that are so similar, but show them as individuals because their genitalia is so different, so they are also different within the art display. So Benoit brings in his plaster little maquettes that he's made of his pieces, but then I have to translate to my fellow glassblowers exactly how the process is going to happen, where the pipe is going to be, where I'm blowing the object and then reattaching it in many times in many circumstances. So I will draw with chalk on the floor. Glassblowing studios have concrete floors, and so that becomes our blackboard for drawing and explaining how things are going to transpire. And then everyone is aware of what's happening and how it's happening. And then glass, it starts at 1,140 degrees when it first comes out of the furnace. But every time you sit on the bench, you have about 32 seconds to work any part of that piece. And so you always have to head back to that reheating station. It's called a glory hole. You go back into the glory hole, you heat it back up again, and then you come out and you have about 28 seconds maybe. If you want to work one specific part, you must heat that area with the torch. Get it nice and hot. Then you must take it back into the reheating station so that heat is absorbed into it. And then you have about 32 seconds to work that one individual part. So glass blowing, usually when you see it on television, on Netflix, you're just seeing people working. What you don't see is all the trial, the tribulation, the sweat, the strength that is needed in order to heat and reheat those gigantic objects.
Well, the thing is, it's very interesting, is that these Aleocharinae are actually very, very common, but mostly people don't know them because they're too small. I mean, one specimen that we have is 0.8 millimeter big, and then it goes from 0.8 to 13 millimeters, but most of them are between 3 and 5 millimeters long. So there's about one specimen per square foot in the forest litter. It's literally there, and they're extremely diverse. It's one of the most diverse beetle, subfamily of beetles, and we all know that beetles are the most diverse of the animals in the animal kingdom. So it calls for this kind of awareness that, you know, there's a whole bunch of diversity right close to us, and nobody's aware of it because they're cryptic. They're living the soil litter and hardly anybody knows them. Probably just the birds are picking at it, and that's about it. And you know, they perform quite important functions in our ecosystem.
I view the whole exhibit a bit like a circus. Glass has always been, for me, about fun, enjoyment, inclusivity, just getting everyone in to create. It's not necessarily about the end product, but it's about the pure exhilaration and enjoyment of it all. And so the exhibition is also playing into that aspect. That's why there's going to be some very bizarre, fun pieces in that in the area that will just cause you to chuckle. But then there's also going to be that fully scientific entity. And I think that's what life is about. Life is about the serious, and life is about the hilarious, and there's everything in between. And I think Benoit and I are going to manage to capture that somehow for this.